All right, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Enough to Keep Going podcast. This is episode 254 for the week of August 14th, 2022. It has been a long summer, and like always, we've got a little more news about some delayed games. But before we get there, as we do here on the E2KG, we've got what we've been playing. We've got some recent games. We've got just dredging through our backlogs. Once a month, we're going to hit you with our gaming assignments. As parents who game, we're making sure that we give ourselves one last bit of summer vacation homework as well before we head into the fall and a new school year for all of us. Anyhow, but joining me tonight is Game Logic. Game Logic is getting things ready on his end, so I'm going to just say I'm glad to be back. I was out last week. I was traveling out on vacation, which I thought would mean that I'd have a lot of time to play my Switch. And it did, maybe a little bit, but I did not end up spending a whole lot of time with Xenoblade Chronicles 3. This was, I talked about it 2 weeks ago, right? A big release coming out. Thought I was going to end up playing some more of that and being able to really dive into it. But I got to say that I ended up spending more time on my phone playing the other game I was talking about 2 weeks ago, which is Octopath Traveler Champions of the Continent, and making my way. What I thought was the end of the story, now there's more story, all kinds of different side stories with multiple different characters. Again, haven't spent any money on it, enjoying the RPG kind of 16-bit aspects of it. And that is where I have ended up spending most of my RPG time, is with Square games. And so also this week, DioField Chronicle, which is a strategy, tactical, real-time game coming out in September, dropped a demo, and I've had a chance to kind of play a significant part of that. And like they've done for some of their other games like Triangle Strategy and Octopath Traveler, that you end up with a demo that can continue, or at least that gets you through a big meaty chunk. I have not seen the end of it, so, and I don't quite know if your levels carry over, because I haven't got to the end, and it doesn't tell you early. But what it does tell you is it really gives you a lot of time with its systems. This is a game that, looking at it, sounded tactical, sounded like a strategy RPG. It plays out, looking at it, it plays out almost more like a real-time RTS game. But actually, what I found, the closest comparison is playing like a classic BioWare game, playing Baldur's Gate, playing the original Dragon Age Origins, that you have control of a few units, you have different attacks, movement abilities, flanking. You pause the game as you're issuing commands. They carry those out. You have a variety of combat types in terms of ranged, assassins, mounted, and it feels like Dragon Age 1 type of combat pulled back significantly in terms of the viewpoint pulled back. But then it also feels like they mashed in some Fire Emblem kind of social aspects, that you're moving around in between battles, talking to people, gearing up. I don't know enough yet. It doesn't seem like there's kind of the relational dynamic in here as well. It does not seem that, but again, it does look like you're going to be building a larger cast of characters, but you can only take a few into battle at a time. And it sets us in this kind of Middle Ages European, very similar to Ivalice and Final Fantasy Tactics. Not the same world, but that same type of tone in terms of warring nations. And lo and behold, you are partied with one of the people who has a birthright to leadership. So we'll see where all that goes, but I've been playing it on the Switch. I also downloaded it on the PS5. It runs really smooth on the Switch. It runs like butter on the PlayStation 5. Graphically, it doesn't look all that different. I think one of the things about these kind of mid-tier RPG projects out of Square in the last few years, I know Swiss really liked one of those ones last year. I also enjoyed earlier this year the I can't even think of it. Voice of Cards. But some of these where they don't have a huge budget, but have some story ambitions or some systems ambitions, and so that has been. It's kind of nice to dive into something. I was interested in it. Now I'm very. I really enjoyed it. Now I'm very curious to see how it all plays out. It feels often at times because of the RTS nature of it. It feels like I almost wish I had a mouse and keyboard. It is out on PC. It is out on Xbox, PlayStation, and Switch. So, but by the nature of kind of clicking and dragging and moving people around, it definitely feels like a mouse and keyboard, some hotbar aspects for different attacks. But the way the menus are laid out makes it very clear. It even feels a little bit. I was playing XCOM on my iPad over vacation. There's even a little bit of that with positioning in terms of the strategy aspects there. So it's a kind of hodgepodge, but if you like strategy or RTS genres, as a free demo, it's worth giving it a try and see if it strikes your fancy. And that is me filling air until Game Logic is ready. Well, actually, it's not, because I was interested in this game, but now after playing it, I'm very interested in it. And so I'm glad they put a demo out. This is wise because it does kind of straddle that line between, a turn-based strategy expectations and also kind of the real-time strategy. But the fact that you pause when you issue commands gives the ability to kind of slow it down more than you would in an RTS type of game. And you don't have any resource management. It's really kind of hero units that you're moving around the battlefield in like a real-time Fire Emblem-esque way. So, Game Logic, I have one big question for you. I know I was not here last week, but I looked at the agenda, and nowhere in there are you talking about playing games on an Xbox. But here, you've got multiple games on an Xbox. So is it because you're playing through the cloud on your PC, or are you back into the console fold? There's a story here, I'm sure.
I am back, at least partially. So while I was sick, I got my 72-hour invite or whatever for an Xbox Series X. I missed it while I was sick, and so I re-upped and seemingly promptly got an invite like a day or two later, I think about 2 days. So I went ahead and plugged down for my Xbox Series X. I had an upgrade planned for kind of my last upgrade that I'm going to do for one of the PC boxes in the studio, but I went ahead and nudged that aside to pick up the Xbox Series X. I'm not really in any rush to upgrade that PC anyway. It's 2 years old. I've got some time, and it has a new video card in it. I just need to bump the processor.
So you got a Series X.
Yes.
And the game you want to talk about first is Doom 3?
I've been playing a few things on it, but because I re-signed up for Game Pass, I have been kind of going through, some choice selections and picks from that service. And Doom 3 was one of the ones that I did because, I'd played Doom 2016 fairly recently. I played it on the PlayStation 4 when it first came out. And then did another run on the Nintendo Switch here fairly recently, in the last, year or so. And then, of course, I played Doom Eternal when it launched and played it through completion on PC. So Doom 3 is kind of one of those, it's a skosh of a blind spot. I never really finished that game. I just kind of dabbled in it. So it was up on Game Pass, and so I thought I would go back and take it for a whirl.
Is that original Xbox or 360?
I believe it was a 360 game, I want to say. But, this is... this is one of the things that, I mean, quite frankly, I think I'm just rolling over and just thinking about all these things as PC games and not thinking about them in terms of console generations, because, a thing that came out on the Xbox 360 then came out on the Xbox One and got Xbox One enhancements, and then now it's got frame rate boost and all sorts of, like, it's just, like, I just think about them as like PC games with enhancements that are layered on, right, for whatever the advancing generation of hardware is.
Yeah, that's true, right? Like if the release was 2004 for the original Xbox, it did have a 360 upgrade to it. Yep.
So I have been playing it. So, Doom 3 was one of the games that I've been playing, along with a host of other newer stuff. But, the revisit of it is kind of interesting because I didn't realize, but I mean, there's a stark contrast. I mean, so this was one of Carmack's last, this is Carmack's last Doom that he put fingers on before he then kind of moved way into the background as kind of a senior scientist advisor, and then eventually, made the move off with Oculus. But like, there's Doom 2016 is just a straight up gunfight, right? Doom Eternal is predominantly a straight up gunfight. There are some jump scares in Doom Eternal just because of size of enemies. But Doom 3 is really a corridor shooter. And it's really built very heavily on jump scares, and it's really much more oriented towards a System Shock 2 kind of design. Then definitely, far more so from a Spectrum perspective than Doom 2016 or Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal are both hopped up on steroids. You're moving through levels with lightning speed. There's all sorts of platforming. There's no platforming, right, in Doom 3 that I've been exposed to yet. Here I'm in the early goings. It's all very much kind of a Dead Space oriented kind of System Shock 2 type of corridor shooter with, like I said, with jump scares and things crawling out of vents and bodies dropping down from the ceiling and things coming out of, little tunnels that you can't get into. So it's much more so in that vein, and the atmosphere is just starkly different than those other two games. Which, are both of those things are much more so kind of in the shooter vein where you feel like you're playing like something that's akin to like a Call of Duty or Destiny 2, right, or other types of shooters in that vein. So it's been super. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, I think that's also true then for Doom 3, that it makes sense within that historical context of 2004, 2003 to the development time. Yep.
Yep. So that's why I've been playing.
Killed your train of thought. Oh no!
So I've been playing it the last few days, just kind of nibbling at it a bit at a time. It is something that is super spooky to be playing at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning with headphones on. It is not a comfortable game to be playing at that time. The radio chatter in that game, we give lots of credit to Guardians of the Galaxy and kind of the kind of AI ML implementation that they went with that game in terms of building out an entirely new narrative engine that kind of generated a lot of the banter right between that team. And it's not nearly that sophisticated, but there's still a ton of radio chatter on in the background, tons of audio logs. Some of the radio chatter is repetitive, but there are some, it's not constantly repetitive, right? There are some new drum beats in there periodically, within the time period of like a 1 to 2 hour kind of sit down session. So it's been fairly refreshing, right, to go back to it. It is not the frustration fest by any means that Doom Eternal was. I have hit some points where I've had to kind of go back and replay some sections. It does. I don't know if it. Maybe it has an autosave favor, but it's a really stingy autosave feature where it must be only autosaving like per level. So there's some long distances in between levels. So it is heavily reliant on you manually saving, right, as you go through. And I've only gotten, a handful of weapons so far. I think I just got my third one. So I had the pistol, then got the shotgun, and now I've gotten the machine gun. It seems like apparently there's no zoom to iron sights or anything like that. So it kind of is on the left side.
Was Iron Sights even a thing in 2014? I mean, 2004.
I'm gonna have to go back, right? And this is part of the thinking that got me that I kind of started to orient around when I talked about BioShock Remastered last week, right? There's definitely things that we kind of project, right, in terms of our revisionist history look at game design, where you would swear that there's been Iron Sights like forever, but now I really have to wonder, and I really probably have to go back to like Half-Life to see if there was a zoom to sight in there. There's definitely not one in Doom 3, which just seems really strange to me, but might potentially be the truth, right, in terms of game design. So I've crawled over and over and over the control scheme to see like, am I just missing it? Like, what's going on? But that left trigger is actually flashlight, right? So it's not zoom to sight. So, which is an interesting thing. Again, but in terms of modernity, one of the things that has definitely come along is the way games, including shooters, address lighting. And lights, and I think I've mentioned on this podcast, on more than one occasion, I hate the lighting mechanic in Destiny 2, right, versus Halo, right? In Halo, you can turn Master Chief's light on. In Destiny 2, it comes on for you. The problem I have with that is very often I want the headlamp on, but there's no way to actuate it and toggle it yourself. And I'm like, how dare you decide that right, when my eyesight requires, right, some additional illumination, I would prefer to have that control myself. And of course, this flashlight also has a battery drain mechanic, right? So you turn it on and then it can only stay on for so long. So it's an interesting knit in there. It's some neat instances of game design. Obviously, Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal are great games and are arguably more fun than Doom 3, but you could definitely see how that game kind of started to bridge the design between kind of the old approach to Doom and started kind of paving the way for the things that were going to come down the pike. So it's been really enjoyable, and like I said, it's been enjoyable in that, like I said, it shows more attention to detail and deliberateness, right, with regards to atmosphere and environments than the newer games do.
So aim down sights has been around prior to 2003, just doing a little digging here, right? 2004 with Doom, 2003, 2004. You also had a contemporary of Doom 3 would have been the original Call of Duty, right? Right in that same kind of time frame. So I appreciate the analysis of Doom 3, but I want to pull back at a system level here. And this is your first time having a Series X. Is that correct? Because you had a Series S and you've had a PlayStation 5. So now that you've owned all three, how do they shake out in terms of I don't know, let's say performance, speed, graphical comparisons, things like that?
So it's a little difficult for me to say because I haven't reacquired a PlayStation 5 yet. Where I am, but I have been digging at some other details, right? So let me preface this by saying, right, without question, as I've said on this podcast for years and years and years and years, and probably going all the way back to the original Xbox, right? At the end of the day, regardless of titles, the Xbox system is my preferred system simply because it is an extension of the Windows ecosystem, right? And that's where I spend a lot of time, right, both working and in my free time. And given that it's a derivative of that environment, I just always feel like natively comfortable, right, in that it seems like less of a janky divide than it is when I am on the PlayStation, which just does some things that are inherently different, right, in its approach to UI, its integration of services, and other things, and things that it, in many cases kind of removes from your control in a very kind of Apple-esque fashion. I went on and on and on at the beginning of this generation about the fact that, like, with the Xbox UI, you can customize it, right? And so you can move things out of your way that you're never going to touch. Whereas on the PlayStation UI, you always have to traverse and navigate by icons and submenus and things that, like, I never use. And that's, again, from somebody who spent some time in UI design, that's aggravating, right? And then, I've spent some time kind of digging at specifications, and I'm sure this was much of hubbub at the beginning, but, when you talk about, RDNA2 architecture, and you talk about some of the parameters and physical and digital characteristics of the sock, of the variances in the socks that Microsoft and PlayStation went with. That die for the sock that the Xbox sits on is larger than PlayStation 5. It has more transistors. It has more compute overall. And so I'm still of the mindset that has historically been the case, Microsoft has always arrived with, arguably the more powerful hardware set, and has always carried that through with, the Scorpio and all that sort of stuff. That being said, obviously, from a business perspective, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the PlayStation hasn't outsold Xbox 2 out of 3 generations, right? That's simply a quantifiable fact, right? And in that third generation, in that middle generation of the PlayStation 3, right, the PlayStation 3, walked the Xbox 360 down after the 360 had a 1-year head start. Sony flubbed the PlayStation 3 launch, but unfortunately, Xbox kind of tripped itself up by the shoestrings and tackled itself at the knees with the Red Ring of Death. But also, Sony obviously kind of turned some things around in the middle of that generation, right? Focusing more on gamers and game titles. And that's obviously carried it through. So at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, I'm going to be happy, at a certain point to eventually, own both. I was talking to a friend of mine who I guess on her podcast sometimes. And I just, rattled off the type of games, right, that appeal to me, like PvP shooters, racing games, MMOs, MOBAs, right? All those types of games that are not those story-driven, cinematic, near linear, wide path, kind of SIE blueprint games, right, that everybody kind of rah-rahs, right? And that's why I go, those games are great games, but those games are great games, but I don't hold them up as like the one golden yardstick by which everything else has to conform to, right? They're great games, but I can take them or leave them. I can experience them, but when you talk to me about like, what am I worried about playing like the next day, right? It's the PvP, MMO, MOBA, right, kind of thing that's, Destiny 2, World of Warships, Warframe, Forza Motorsport, Forza Horizon. I've been playing a lot of Forza Horizon. We'll talk about that a little bit later on today. And as much as that game is appealing, right, in terms of its, I don't want to say dumbing down, but like the increasing width of its appeal, right? I am super looking forward to Forza Motorsport and just getting my stinking tires on asphalt, right? And focusing on, right, a true kind of GT motorsport racer, rather than like all the cross country and the stunts and all that kind of stuff. So from a hardware perspective and an ecosystem perspective, like I like at home and happy, right, being on Xbox. I look forward to getting a PlayStation. Actually, somebody tried to cue me in that invites are up on Amazon, although I'm already in the invite queue and I haven't got my invite. And a buddy of mine who, again, appears on a podcast that I'm on now mentioned that, his store and GameStop will have some here within the next week. So I may just go ahead and knock that one out. So I look forward to owning it. But again, I'm immediately fell in pleased as punch right on Xbox with, games through Game Pass and things like that. Just one other interesting tidbit that I'll wrap up with, right, with regards to Game Pass. And, I've gone full circle with that service, since 2019. When was the day and date announcement? Was that 2019, 2020?
I think it was at least 19. Yeah.
Okay. So
I think even further back. Yeah.
I think it was 2019, because I want to say Game Pass was 2017. The studio acquisition announcement was E3 2018. And then I want to, it was either 19 or 20 that it did, like, it kind of became apparent, right, from a business perspective that there was, there was a lot of squeeze going on from a Game Pass perspective, but Microsoft wasn't getting as much juice. And then all of a sudden the announcement came in. I want to say it was 2019, because I want to say it was the year before the new consoles.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, right.
I agree.
So obviously I had another choice to make, right, with regards to Game Pass, because at the time I was not a Game Pass subscriber at all. And so the history goes, I was not on Game Pass. Day and date announcement came out. PC announcement came out, right? Because I think those were the same year too. And I said, okay, now we're at the tip over point, right? And I went full on board with Game Pass Ultimate. And then at one point I backed off to just Game Pass on PC. I went back to Game Pass Ultimate, and then when I got rid of the consoles this last time, I went Game Pass on PC and then no Game Pass at all. And so this time it was time to make that choice again. And I just went Ultimate because I was just looking at the incremental cost of like, I was like, I have to get games with gold, right? That's not really optional. And I'm like, at that point, right, am I just at a tip over point where I just may as well go Ultimate? And that's where I was. So I just went ahead and did Ultimate. I figured just pay for the convenience and like not agonize over the question and just be done with it.
Yep, there's still a benefit there. There's lots of value, even, and I think you're right? Like the difference in price between the baseline games with gold and Ultimate, especially if you're buying in 3-month increments or even further, it's a small price. It's a small price increase for the quantity of what you get within it. So, all right, well, that's a good conversation. Lots of catch up on. Glad that you are. Thanks for sharing in terms of your experience with the X. I was, as a former S owner, I was curious to see kind of how that felt, kind of jumping back in.
Yeah, I guess sorry. One other thing I should cover. You asked the question with regards to performance, right? And so just to paint the picture, so I still play at 1440p on Xbox, right? Which again is, go back and talk about extension of ecosystem, right? It's just like playing on yet another PC because I play on PC at 1440p, play on one of the same monitors, right? So it's an Acer 27-inch, right, HDR, 2560 by 1440p QHDR display, and so that's what it's hooked up to now. I play at 1440p 120, which again, very similar to PC. And so it's been great. Like Forza Horizon 5, right at 1440, 120, and all the other games that I've been playing, as well as, Doom 3 with its frame rate boost and things like that. So, again, right in that sweet spot, could I play at 4K 60? Sure. Are frames more important to me than 4K resolution? Absolutely, without question. I just, over time, and I've done as deep of the experiment as anybody needs to do, right? As anybody could do, between TVs and displays and all sorts of things. And I find 1440p at high frame rates with HDR, just a much more attractive, gameplay proposition than 4K 60.
All right. Well, let's move off of our new stuff and into some news. That was a terrible segue, but you know what? We're going to run with it. So, as I talked about earlier in the podcast, we have some more delays to share. And again, not really that surprising. So you put one, I've got one here. Hogwarts Legacy, I'm not surprised that it's delayed until 2013 or 2023. The fact that it was potentially coming out this fall and we haven't really seen a whole lot more of it over the course of the summer wasn't a surprise. The one that is a little more surprising is the one that you have here, which has been delayed yet again. Do you want to take this one, Game Logic?
Yeah, so this is Marvel's Midnight Suns, a game being worked on by Firaxis of Take-Two. Of Take-Two ownership. The game's being moved out to 2023, which should purportedly, again, kind of very similar to the Xbox move, right? Xbox came into the showcase and said, look, we announced Redfall and Starfield delays. Now here comes the showcase where we're telling you this is what you're going to be playing for next 12 months, which answers the question that had been burning for me, which was, every time a game is delayed into the following year, it's always an outstanding question whether or not they're just going to push it to the next holiday season. And so in similar fashion to that showcase, Take-Two, when reporting their most recent round of financials, indicated that this game would be released within this current fiscal year, which obviously from a stockholder perspective plays into, right, the remaining revisions of and applicability of guidance, financial guidance that would have been released as far as being applicable to this fiscal year. So it mentions that some people have gotten, some media journalists have gotten their hands on a build for some gameplay, and reports about that were positive. It was an early build, so some things obviously need to be worked on. But in the in the wake of Guardians of the Galaxy coming out, and things in the Marvel property kind of seeming like they are shaking off the misgivings that foul smell that would have been given off by Square Enix's Avengers. This looks like it's pointed in the right direction. Now, there's been much ado this week, I think overly so, about the notion that games are moving out of the way for God of War Ragnarok, which to me just sounds kind of like a big bagel of nothing. When big blockbuster movies are announced, right, movie schedules change, right? Nobody's going to launch on the same week as Avengers Endgame, right? It just doesn't make fiscal sense. And so that shouldn't be surprising. It also kind of shouldn't matter. I think what kind of matters is, what we have seen the propensity for over the last couple of years is you get this bow wave of games that claim that they're launching right in the February, March timeframe for the following year. And that starts to look like kind of second Christmas. And we've had 1 year where though that trend was started and everything got delayed except for Resident Evil 7 and Horizon Zero Dawn, which was good for them because they were able to kind of own right that spring. And then we had last year where all the games, like there was a big bow, or this year actually, all the bow wave of games was announced and they actually came out, right? So we actually got Horizon Forbidden West and Gran Turismo and Elden Ring, and a pretty decent bumper crop kind of games right in that spring timeframe. So we will. So what was it? So this is an even year. The first time around, it was an odd year when they all got delayed. Actually, Breath of the Wild came out that year also. So let's see if the trend is odd year, even year. In odd years, it's a fallacy and it's a false prophecy, and nothing. All those things get delayed, but on even years they actually land. So next year's an odd year, so we'll odd numbered year, so we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, we will see. I think that this is much more about game development and polish and still kind of knock-on effects of COVID than it is kind of moving out of the way of Ragnarok. Yeah.
Well, I don't discount that these moves, including this one, right, were, well, if not because of Ragnarok, we're not influenced, right? When you take what you mentioned, but also then make it combinatorial with the fact that Ragnarok is coming, it's like, well, why wouldn't you take the extra time to polish, right, and tighten up gameplay if you're not going to do that and you're going to release it and you're just going to be in a highly contentious, right, release market at the time. So yeah.
Fair enough. So you mentioned a Capcom game, Resident Evil. You've got another story here related to Capcom and a departure after a long tenure.
Yeah, so I kind of wish Swiss was on because he's much more so the Capcom expert than I am. But producer Hiroyuki Kobayashi has departed Capcom after 27 years on board. He actually left back in March. So not unusual in this industry or other tech industries. Lots of times things happen and we don't find out about them till months later. Again, kind of look at Apple and how they've handled the departure of Johnny Ive. And so he's gone. So can you help me out? Do you know what is he famous for during his tenure at Capcom?
I really don't know.
Okay. Well, I think the other important thing is not only did he leave Capcom, but he has gone over to NetEase. Which I didn't get a chance to research it before, but it rings a bell as being a publisher, developer that has also made some recent talent acquisitions. I forget if, I want to say a Halo developer maybe left there, and maybe someone from Sony Santa Monica, left to go there, as well as I think someone from Sony Santa Monica as well. So I want to say NetEase is a developer who is also has a lot of swirl around them about impending live service games that are going to be getting released. And so it's an interesting mix of personalities that are kind of starting to swirl around that studio and publisher, as far as kind of, by name association, by background association. Obviously, lots of people with those backgrounds that I mentioned, they're not entirely similar. And so you may be getting a very kind of unique mix, right, of properties that may potentially be coming out of NetEase.
So just to give Kobayashi his due, he was a programmer on the original Resident Evil and Resident Evil 2. Then he moved as a producer, Resident Evil, the remake in 2002, Resident Evil 4, Devil May Cry 4, Dragon's Dogma, Resident Evil 6 was the last Resident Evil that he worked on. So as an executive producer at that point. So a higher up within Capcom after a long tenure, but someone who made their way up through the ranks as a programmer.
Yeah, so just to add a little more meat on the bone to the story with NetEase. So NetEase is, part of the swirl around them is that they are very close in size to Tencent, and seem to be, a group that's kind of muscling in on their territory. So yeah, just kind of a thing to keep an eye on, right? One thing is becoming very, very true. And NetEase in size is now bigger than Activision Blizzard and Electronic Arts in terms of revenue. So one thing that continues to be true, and a thing that's going to be very interesting, right? We keep, obviously the rest of podcasts and YouTube and et cetera kind of continue to hyper focus on kind of the I'll call them tabloid worthy kind of news stories, right? And focusing on the Activision Blizzard acquisition and all of the Hufflepuff between, Microsoft and Sony, right? With the Brazilian Trade Commission and New Zealand and blah, blah, blah. But in the meantime, right, what I've mentioned, right, since these whole things have started, I'm like, people hyper focus on those, and like, let's not forget Embracer has been like gobbling developers up left and right, hundreds of games purportedly in development. And then you have notions like Tencent, right? A lot of people like talk about how Microsoft was pushed to make the Activision Blizzard acquisition, but I'm like, the reality is by size, right, the nearest person, right, to them is more so Tencent, right, than Sony. When you talk about the numbers of studios that they've already acquired and are looking to acquire. And now you have NetEase. So you have NetEase, Embracer, and Tencent. Just ginormic entities, right, on the face of the gaming industry that in many cases rival kind of, and again, this is our United States centric kind of view of the world, right? And what happens when we do this is we stop paying attention to other things that are going on around the world and around us. And obviously, right, these moves that NetEase are making are important moves that are going to wind up impacting the industry beyond just kind of the low hanging fruit, right, of Microsoft and Sony. So it'll be interesting to kind of see where these houses go.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point in terms of the size and scope of NetEase and Tencent, and the avenues that they have into China and other markets that, even with a US centric, thinking about Blizzard and Activision Blizzard and Diablo Immortal, that they needed a partnership, or even Activision Blizzard with Overwatch and other things, that they've had to partner with Tencent and with NetEase in terms of development and launch in certain territories. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that argument plays out for US regulators as they're looking at the Activision Blizzard Microsoft acquisition. And how much of that kind of, American-centric goggles get applied when really it's an international industry and market, and being able to compare on a much wider scale is a more relative comparison than within smaller game developers, as it might have been the case a generation ago.
Right, and I've listed a lot of reasons why Microsoft is going to be given a hard time about this acquisition, but these here are also reasons why, right, it may be heavily supported by certain members of Congress, right? While there's definitely sentiment to kind of keep an eye on big tech and watch how big they grow, there's also sentiment right in DC to keep an eye on globalization and international markets. And, it has long been hashed, right, how big is Tencent's footprint, right, and how much of an anchor point does it give them to to enact on behaviors, right, that penetrate into the U.S., right? And so there's definitely interest and support in having a competitor that rivals them in size, right? And that might be a reason why there are political pressures, right, to allow the Microsoft Activision Blizzard merger to go through.
It wouldn't be enough to keep going podcast without a little business industry talk as well. So thank you for sticking with us through that. It's a valuable piece to have that perspective in terms of how things shake out, and that it isn't just for as small as this industry can feel in terms of the number of players or this. It's huge, not only in terms of the international scope, but also in terms of the size of development teams, that it can be significantly large AAA games like we've been talking about with Ragnarok, or it can be very small single studio games like one of the ones that I've been playing, which is Frogun. It is one developer. It is by Mogato, is the main programmer, designer, developer, collaborated with somebody for music, but I had talked about it a few months ago during Steam's Next Fest. It is I would say 1998, 99 era esque puzzle platformer. It feels very much ripped out of PlayStation 1 in terms of its graphical style, with a nice kind of filter over the top to high res up its low polygons. And it does the same thing where you've got to babysit some camera to loop around, but it is really enjoyable. It's $15. It came out last week. It has been on sale, kind of a launch sale, but you are a young girl going out to rescue their parents, and you have a gun, which is really a frog tongue that grabs onto stuff, pulls you over to ledges, unlocks puzzle pieces. And so you're navigating through this. It's almost, it's a Captain Toad treasure tracker type of navigation with the ability to jump. And it does, given the low polygon aspect of it all, it has a nice silhouette, a nice circle of where your shadow is, so you know where you're going to land as you're jumping in between kind of heights of platforms. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's pretty straightforward, pretty simple. It's, the fact that it is developed by one person and feels as polished as it does is a real testament to how, to game design and development in this day and age, just as we were talking about large international corporations that single studio projects, single person projects can create very enjoyable experiences as well. So let's move from a single person developed game into another big AAA franchise with Playground Games Horizon 5. Last time I was here, you were talking a little bit about the Hot Wheels expansion. Have you had a chance to play it a little bit more now that you're playing it back on the Series X?
Yeah, I definitely have, and I've kind of ping-ponged back and forth between playing, an hour here and there in the expansion and then an hour in the base. The fact of the matter remains that each time these expansions come out, they're interesting and they're neat, and they're definitely a thing to be, talked about and a value. But much like I prefer kind of the straight stick approach of Forza Motorsport, I also kind of prefer the baseline game of Forza Horizon 5 over the expansion. So I always want to get back and continue kind of plugging away at the base game. And so that's what I've been doing. I think one of the things that's most interesting about the Hot Wheels expansion is the history, right? So a lot of the story modes kind of go back over kind of the history behind, right, the toy line and kind of the engineering aspects that went into it. It's really kind of an amazing story to look at, and to look at all of the focus on the technology of the cars and like how to make them essentially like go fast, and all the engineering around the tracks and kind of the craft around like how to make the toy interesting, right? You know, in this day and age where we're talking very intensely about like the competitive actions of Microsoft and Sony and like what makes sense right on the digital landscape, you know, here was a time where these guys were trying to make a highly differentiated toy, right? That would be something on the market that wasn't just an oh, by the way, or, you know, just another thing. So that's been super interesting to place kind of some of the story missions in the Hot Wheels expansion to hear that history. And then getting to drive some of the famous Hot Wheel cars, right? Which, you know, you can, you know, when you play them, you can remember, right, having some of those toys. You know, I wasn't like a super hardcore Hot Wheels person. I was probably more of a Matchbox Cars kind of person.
So I was just thinking, like, I had a lot of Matchbox.
right. But you could definitely see like some of the kind of famous models that kind of click in your head from having owned or seen like a friend with them. So that's been cool. And then I've been continuing to plug away at the base game. Again, I have like 163 cars out of like the 647. So it's just like ridiculous. I am seeing more and more. I'm seeing fewer and fewer drivatars of people on my friends list that are higher level than me. So that number's you know, slowly being reduced to, you know, a number that I can count on one hand. I forget what was the other thing I was going to say, but, you know, I've been happy to kind of continue along and chug through. Achievements. That was the other thing I was going to mention, you know, and it's very glad, you know, I'm very happy about continuing to play a game that is kind of this long in the tooth from the number of hours that I've spent in it already. I think I mentioned, you know, in Forza Motorsport 4, I wound up, you know, overall time spending like 120 hours in that game. And I'm sure I'll get there. In Forza Horizon 5, I think I want to say I've spent like maybe 30 in it so far, which is easily, right, the amount of time that I would spend in any kind of single player, right, narrative, story-driven kind of game. So it's nice to be that far into the game and still occasionally hit an achievement. One of the things that's interesting, and it's, I think it's a positive for, I guess, you know, consumers of a certain type who are in Game Pass but also still buy their games is, and I dislike this because it's often, people often take these percentages and just kind of run off into the sunset with them, extrapolating kind of wild conjectures about what they mean. But, you know, Forza Motorsport 5 obviously has gained a lot of accolades for so many people like touching it. You know, and both Microsoft and its fandom will claim that number is the number of people who have played it. And I'm like, just because you've downloaded the game, installed it, and started it once, that doesn't really break my threshold of being significant. But fine, we'll report the number. But the end result of that is when you pop a Chivo, right, it's like every achievement comes up like being rare, right? Like, oh, only 2.2% of gamers have this. I'm like, yeah, because 20 million people downloaded and installed it but didn't actually play it. So fine, I'll take it, right? It's on my achievement list, right, as something that appears to be that, you know, that very, very few people have actually achieved. And Halo Infinite, right, is the same way. You know, I'm not going to talk about Halo Infinite a lot tonight, but like I did recently just talk about an analog. You know, I did recently. I think there's an achievement for like grappling. I think it's grappling someone in a way that swings you around behind them and then does a backslap. So there's some kind of weird achievement for that I'd never heard before. And I heard it, you know, go off because the announcer announces it like when you play the game, and I'm like, and I looked it up afterwards, and it's like 1 point something % of people, and I'm like, well, because it's a free multiplayer, is free to play, and so tons of people have started Halo Infinite. So now my achievements look really rare. But yeah, Forza continues to kind of really, be a lot of fun. And when I go back to why did I come back to consoles in the first place, right? And it's while I say that I'm very, very, very comfortable gaming sitting at my desk as I'm doing right now, which is, how I play my consoles, right? So my Nintendo Switch is here, which is my secondary gaming PC. And then, the Series, actually, this is my primary gaming PC. And then my Series X is over at the secondary gaming PC. So I'm, again, at a desk, right, sitting in a bucket seat, playing, kind of sitting up and leaning forward. However, right, even though I'm not sitting on a couch, right, it's still kind of that I come home, I hit the X button, the thing powers on. I don't have a lot of things to worry about. I don't have to worry. Like today I got hit like on 3 different PCs with the need for Windows updates, right, in a scary enough way that I was like, I don't know that I really want to live stream or do a podcast or do these things without taking that Windows update. So, the simplification of the plane in playing console games is still there, and it's still of pertinent value.
So your next game, Far Changing Tides, I played probably like the first half hour of it a couple months ago when it was in the Xbox, the rewards, like play it, and I enjoyed the style of it. How did you, but I stumbled across it because of the rewards program, and it was the weekly game. Is this something that's been on your radar, or just kind of churning through Game Pass, gems here?
Yeah, no, I actually had this on my list to play, and then as I entered it on the list, I wrote a note, like, see if this is in Game Pass. So I wanted to go, the game was a target before I, not because it was in Game Pass, but just, it was in Game Pass as a byproduct. And so I want to say, isn't this a sequel? Wasn't there another Far before this?
Yeah, Changing Shore.
Yeah. So this is a game that actually we saw, I want to say, at the E3 before this generation launched. Because I want to say, was it Far Changing Shore a launch title?
Now I gotta look here.
Okay. So somewhere around there, either in the last vestiges of the Xbox One series or the Xbox One generation, or at the launch of Series X. I've always been attracted to the game just because it was kind of hauntingly beautiful, right, in terms of its animation style. So what was that? You looked up? You got something?
Yeah, it was Far Lone Sails.
Okay.
And yes, it is a hauntingly beautiful. It came out in 2018. And 2019 for Xbox and PlayStation.
Okay. So it was, in the last waning, 2 years of that generation. And, I've always been attracted to it and kind of wanted to play it. It was always more appealing to me than some of the other kind of indie titles, mainly because of its vehicular orientation, right? Because we all know that, any planes, trains, and automobiles is always my shtick. And so, this one, when it arrived on the series, it's been in the back of my head that I wanted to get around to play it. And so I took it out for a spin. I probably haven't played too much further than you have, right? In terms of that first hour, I think I maybe played into it like the first an hour or so. Again, the art is exquisite. Like, it's just really, and the art in terms of the whole package, right? The 2D backgrounds, the kind of 2D faux 3D kind of animations, the animation style, the music, the fluidity, like, and the puzzles themselves, right? Just the whole package is just, it is definitely firmly in that art house style, right? That you've mentioned and that Swiss kind of refers to, and it's just gorgeous. The problem for me, if there is it's heavily puzzle oriented. We all know that I don't like puzzles. I'm not super keen about them. And then the other part of it is there's a nit in the design language, and it's good that I recognize that that's what it is and where it is, because it means eventually, hopefully, I'll be able to figure it out. But there's a weird nit in the transitions where I don't always realize that I've gotten into a puzzle area, right? So a lot of times it feels like, man, it seems like I've just been transiting in silence for a very long time. Shouldn't I have gotten into like a puzzle area at this point? And so sometimes you are and I don't recognize it, right? And sometimes you're in areas and you really overthink what the complexity of the puzzle is, and then it's like, it's not, dude, it's really not that complex, right? And so I think part of the nit that's missing in the design language is there are not all of the indicators for the puzzle so far, all static indicators. There's nothing moving that kind of gives away the notion that it is an interface to be toggled, or that it's kind of the core of the puzzle. And even when you come into the areas, even when I like obtain the submarine, right? And there's a little kind of pre-thing that you go through where you kind of gain like this, I guess
the underwater boost aspect.
Yes, but it's realized by a Batha armor, or it's something. It's some type of like armored kind of scuba piece of gear that you obtain and put on. I mean, that's a kind of a precursor to getting on the sub. And so that part is strange because you get that, and then very shortly after it, you get the sub. And the sub, when you're on that screen, you can't really read it. Not the sub. It's not a sub. Like the sail barge or whatever. You don't really see the barge in its entirety. So you don't actually know that you're on the screen, right, with the barge, unless you have watched the trailer and kind of seen some things that kind of give away that the parts of its physical structure. And then it's not intuitive from a gamer perspective that, because normally we're accustomed to, when we get a thing, we then normally think that there's some time lapse, right, before the next like significant thing. But there's not a lot of time. Like, in fact, there's no time, right? You get the Batha scuba thing, right, put it on, and then like the next, which you need to traverse and get out of the area that you're in. And then when you exit that area and transition into the next one, then the barge is there, right? Which again, is just not what I was thinking would have happened. I would have expected that I would have gone out of that area, that I would have needed to then solve another puzzle to escape to get into the next area, right? And then maybe that area or the next area or two after that, right? The barge would have been there. So there's just some weird kind of drum beats in the design language that I gotta figure out. That being said, it's unlike some other games that I would have gone into it for that first hour and been bounced off of it and been like, yeah, okay, that's enough of that. This is a game that, maybe just because my thoughts have been oriented around it as early as 2018, that I'm keeping on the list with the intention of getting back to and trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, from what you're describing, from what I experienced, it really is a well-designed game, and the pace is something where it does. Like, you are alone. It feels isolated. There's a slowness to it that, in the midst of, let's say, a corridor shooter like Doom 3 or racing fast, that it's a change of pace. It's a palate cleanser type of game.
And there's a hint of tragedy to it as well, right? In fact, I think one of the other reasons
it's more than a hint, right? There is. Yeah.
I think one of the reasons I'm also interested in sticking with it is I see very similar DNA to its pedigree as Stray. And since I just finished Stray and played that all the way through, I'm kind of, maintaining the continuity of that kind of interest. Right, and when I say it feels like there's I don't know the backstory because I didn't play the first one, and so when I say there's that hint of tragedy, there's, as you submerge and you go underwater, first of all, as you mentioned, you're alone, so clearly something happened to everyone else, and then you go underwater and you see all these indications of destruction and all types of debris strewn all over the place, and you're I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, and even underwater, it's flooded civilization to some degree as well, right?
Right. And so you're a child in the game. You appeared. I keep going underwater, and I keep expecting this oxygen meter to show up, which hasn't shown up. So I'm like, can I breathe underwater, or is this just one of these like avant-garde kind of stylistic HUD approaches where they're just not going to put it on the screen? So you appear to have some degree of self-sufficiency, and as you said, right, there's clear indications of tragedy. There's a lack of awareness or knowledge of like why you've survived, and why, what abilities exactly you have and why, and that's part of, again, kind of that Stray like kind of mystery, that's kind of keeping me interested.
Nice. All right, I'm going to stick with another indie title here. So while I was traveling, I did not, as I said before, did not spend as much time on my Switch as I thought, but I ended up breaking out the 3DS a little bit because at the end of this month, the eShop on the 3DS and the Wii U, you are no longer able to add any currency, right? Earlier in the spring was the last time that you could purchase games with credit card. And at the end of August here, August 28th, is the last time that you can put in eShop credit. So buying gift cards and putting them in. So I went back and picked up my last eShop purchase, which was actually the last eShop game released on the 3DS. And that is this small little indie game from William Cage. And it is Fragrant Story. Fragrant Story had a little bit of press when it was announced back in the spring. It was also going to be a physical release. So the last 3DS physical release, which I have right here as Fragrant Story. I picked it up as a collector's, really just as an oddity, as the last, physical 3DS game. And it is... I'm glad that I picked it up as a collector's piece and not because of the game itself. I'm glad that I purchased it also digitally. The soundtrack, which came in the collector's, is great. There is Sakamoto has a couple tracks on it. Yoshi Kudo also has some tracks here. So there's some high big name JRPG collaborators on this, but it really is it's a pixel art. It feels like it's a tactics game. It's a Final Fantasy Tactics like game, but instead of, even the graphical style has the kind of classic Final Fantasy illustrations to it in terms of the character screens, but the pixels are kind of 16-bit, low 32-bit type of pixels. And you, by the nature of seeing it and thinking that it is this strategy RPG with a big sweeping score, it's not actually, has a sweeping soundtrack of one or two songs. The $4, $3 price tag on it is a value, but it also tells you how small the game is. The story mode itself is about 3 maps. You go through, and I cleared it in about 15 minutes. And I thought, what? This can't be the end. But I mean, what it is even from the beginning, you have 12 to 16 different characters, all with different abilities, different magic and skill sets. And so it really is almost... it's not a roguelike because you're not unlocking more as you go necessarily. But what it does is encourages you to go back, try different player combinations. And as you play more, there are a number of other maps that unlock. So the story mode is there really just to kind of get you in and give you a little bit of a taste of the system, and then allow you the ability to go back and play around with the various, basically, how can you tackle these strategy puzzle, combat rooms in a tactics base with different characters, with different move sets, with different power abilities. And so it really, I'm enjoying it. I am glad that I picked it up. It's a lot of fun, but it's one of those games where it encourages you, it gives you the tools to have your own fun with it. Like if you're coming in for a sweeping RPG story, not so much. Fragrant Story is tongue-in-cheek on purpose. It is tongue-in-cheek with Vagrant Story, and but what it does is it really gives you a playground of strategy RPG moves and characters to kind of experiment with. And so that's been kind of fun. So Fragrant Story, if you have any 3DS credit laying around, it's $3 to $4, and it's well worth it to kind of plug back in, find my 3DS charger and plug back in and play a little bit more in that tactics RPG type of fashion, especially in the week here when we've got the official confirmation that Tactics Ogre is getting their remaster coming in November. So nice to come back and play a little bit of tactics RPGs.
Has Nintendo given any indication to when like the 3DS is no longer going to be supported? I think was it the recent move is that you can download, you can still, what is, I thought there was some recent update on the policy on the 3DS store that you can still buy games but you can't add credit to your wallet or something like that.
Yeah, so at the end of August here is the last time that you can add credit through gift cards, through eShop gift cards. You can no longer add credit through, other types of payment. And then basically the eShop, the purchases end later this year. And there are a couple Fire Emblem Fates, which has some DLC, is going to keep open until early spring. But that's kind of, so yeah, it is, they're not saying when they're closing down kind of any type of system updates or things like that. But in terms of the eShop, by the later this fall, it's pretty much done for both the Wii U and the 3DS.
3DS going on eBay for like upwards of $350, $400, by the way. It's ridiculous.
What?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
I actually looked when I couldn't find a Switch OLED. I thought, and I was looking for, like, I backed off of Stadia. I was looking for a travel solution. I was like, oh, well, maybe I'll go like reacquire a 3DS, and I still have my 3DS. But I was like, maybe I'll get like a collector's edition or something. But even if you're not going for a collector's edition, like they are priced to the point where you're like, and I might as well just wait and buy like a next generation console. Like when it becomes available, like they're charging like exorbitant prices for the 3DS. It's pretty amazing.
Wow. That's unexpected. So that wraps up my games, but you got one more here to talk about. You want to take us home with some Monster Hunter?
Yeah, so like I said, I had kind of just recently kind of made a new kind of short order playlist to mix the Xbox Series X into the rotation, and I was sitting right on the precipice I actually had Spider-Man Remaster on PC marked down, but it was actually the 11th, and so the game wasn't launching until the next day. And I was like, well, I'm not gonna like put a premonition pick on my list. I'm putting things on my list that are actually available right now. I know it's one day, but that's just my OCD approach to life. And so I put Monster Hunter, because I was actually playing something on PC that night, was my thing too. I was like, well, I'm not going to, make it Spider-Man and then have to sit and wait the next day and like play something different tonight. I want to play on this PC, for some specific reasons I had. So I got Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak, because again, I've been, I'd recently made a reapproach to that on the Switch once I acquired the Switch OLED, having bounced off that game. Did it show up on the Switch last year? It came to PC this year.
Yes, Switch was last year.
Yeah, so I tried to get on with Monster Hunter Rise because I had failed to onboard with Monster Hunter World. And when I first tried to climb on the horse, or maybe I should say the Palamute, when I got Monster Hunter Rise, I didn't grok the onboarding again. I was still kind of cranky about the way they kind of held you by the hand and led you around to everything. And at the same time, I was also cranky about like the breadth of the systems. I don't want to say depth because I don't know that the systems are really that deep. It's just that they're super wide and there's like 39 different like individual, systems that you have to like figure out. And I don't know that all of them are of value, right, throughout the entirety of the game. And then there are some that are very contextual, right? They're only important, right, in certain parts of the screen. And so kind of stringing together that whole continuity, right, in a way that I felt was less intuitively laid out than, say, Fire Emblem Three Houses. Like, Fire Emblem Three Houses still has the same kind of thing. Like, there's, a wide breadth of skills and mechanics, but only some of them are applicable during certain phases of the game. But I just felt like they're a little more organized with Fire Emblem Three Houses than they are with Monster Hunter Rise. But at any rate, I was able to successfully onboard and stick with it in this second go-round on the Switch OLED, which encouraged me to go ahead and give it a try on PC as well. And so I pulled it down and started playing through it. I do like it. One thing that's still an issue, though, is I play it with controller on PC, and now, like, while I was making fun of you guys when Swiss was on talking about the Pro controller, now I have that issue because I'm playing the same game on one Eastern platform and one Western platform, and the buttons are swapped. So that's a thing. And Monster Hunter Rise already to me has this like an uber heavy hitbox-ish kind of design orientation that just makes me struggle with combat, kind of far worse than like Elden Ring. So I definitely had that problem on PC as well. The thing that is nice about PC is I originally went into the game and was kind of observing the frame counter, the GeForce frame counter, and it seemed like the game was capped initially. So I was very pleased to get further into the game and see that it was not. So, on the system that I was playing on with a GeForce 3070 Ti, I'm easily getting 144 frames per second in HDR with no performance issues or anything. So that part of it should be a very pleasant experience. And I didn't play much more than like the first kind of quest scenario out hunting like the first three monsters, which are kind of like I forget what they're called, the little velociraptor looking things. So I accomplished that mission, struggled through the controls, but regardless, I returned home successful, and and I'll go back to it and press on through on to the next quest.
All right. Excellent. Well, that wraps us up for tonight. We are back next week, and then on the 28th, we have our Pix Plays report out, which is, again, our gaming assignment, as I referenced at the top of the show. This month, our assignment for ourselves is remasters. And whether or not they are worthwhile, whether it was well done, really a broad stretch of how you want to tackle a remaster. But in between then, we start ramping things up. I just got my announcement that my pre-order for Saints Row went through, so I'm ready for that when it launches. This coming week is Madden 23, and if you're on Game Pass, you get the 7-day, 10-hour trial before it launches, which is for EA both a blessing and a curse. Just ask BioWare and Anthem. But so a number of games coming out, along with some smaller indie games. We are OFK, which is a graphic novel and with some original soundtrack and musical scores. It's releasing it episodic, is coming out this coming week as well. So some big ones and small ones.
That's the one based on the real world band.
Yes.
I think they're the actual developers, right?
Yeah. Yep. That they're involved in they're producing those songs. It's all part of this. Yep. Yeah. It's been announced for a while and is just finally coming this coming week here.
Yeah, I really hope it comes out well. I mean, this is more than any other year. I mean, we've had these years that we've heralded as kind of the year of the indie. But really, like, between Stray, As Dusk Falls, We Are OFK, which I'm fingers crossed, is going to be good. This Cult of the Lamb thing, like, it seems like in the past few years, there's been like one indie, right, that's really kind of burned up the charts and really kind of floored everyone. But this year, it seems like there's really kind of a bundle of these really significant on the landscape indie titles, right? Beyond kind of I kind of feel like in the past, some of those titles have been titles that have kind of been falsely buoyed by, the media, and some that have been kind of platform darlings for people who have, been trying to, wage the cultural hegemony of their chosen platform. But I really feel like there's, 4 or 6 kind of indies of, worthy of truly critical merit this year. That's going to make the VGAs interesting to see if more than one of them gets the nod for categories there. But also, then as we turn the corner into 2023 and you get like the awards that are really voted on by industry professionals, right? Who, actual game developers and producers and creative directors. So it'll be interesting to kind of see, which ones get the nod for those as well.
Yeah, there has really been some strong indies out, and I know I've been highlighting a few this show, but there's a lot more coming. Curse Golf comes this coming week, which is, so there's a lot coming down the pipe, and we still have the fall. So we've got lots to talk about here in the next few months.
And we kind of leave Ollie Ollie World right out of that conversation because it launched at the beginning of the year, but
that was January.
A really amazing game. Yeah,
mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's on. I mean, I played it on PC, but it's actually on every platform, right? And I think it's
on everything.
Yeah,
Yep. And the DLC came out over the summer, so yeah, it's there. There's a lot of gameplay there. All right. Well, we will have plenty more to talk about in the coming weeks, so please join us back. Thanks for everybody watching, listening, whether you're here with us tonight or watching and listening whenever, wherever you are. We appreciate it, and we welcome you back next week on the 21st. Towmaster99 will be hosting us and keeping us moving through as we have more to talk about. I'm sure we will. So for myself, DBQ Hams, and Game Logic, this has been episode 254 for our Enough to Keep Going. All right. Enjoy the games you love. Wow, that's not, I just slaughtering my closing. All right, everybody. Well, this must mean that it's time for us to go. So play the games you love those you play with, and be kind to each other. Good night, everybody.
Pa' que tú sepas, nena. Muévete. Mami, muévete, que tu avalao te ha dicho otra vez. Que tu mala santa ya sabe cómo es. Y la santa canta, todo el mundo de pie. Mami, muévete, que tu avalao te ha dicho otra vez. Que tu mala santa ya sabe cómo es. Y la santa canta, todo el mundo de pie. Ay, nena, no te va, ay, no te va. Mueve tu cintura, ahí nada más. Muévete para adelante, después para atrás. Acércate bonita, quédate acá. Muévete, que tu avalao te ha dicho otra vez.